Hey, this is Jared Dees from thereligionteacher.com, and I want to talk about one of the best, most memorable parables in the Bible. Jesus in Luke chapter 15 tells three parables about things that are lost, people that are lost, because that's who he came to save. That's who he came to serve, were the people like the lost sheep and the lost coin. And this lost prodigal son is a story about a father who has two sons, and the younger son asks for all of his inheritance, the property that his half of the property of his father, and takes that and goes and he squanders it all away. He spends it all away on a life of sin and selfishness. And so the story essentially begins right there. The son goes off and he is the prodigal son. And he sins. But he eventually feels sorrow for that sin. There's a famine and he's lost everything. He's spent everything. He's lost everything. And he realizes he is even lower than his father's servants. And that he might as well go back to his father and offer to work as a servant. Because of his sin against his father and against heaven even, he might as well return. And what happened was he had sin, but then he felt sorrow for that sin and felt something that we call contrition. Not only sorrow, but this idea of not wanting to sin again. He wants to change. He wants to come back and seek God, seek the Father's mercy in this story, and doesn't want to be given any kind of recognition other than to be able to be a servant. That humility is one of the reasons why he's accepted in the way that he does. He goes back to the Father, and the Father feels compassion. He sees his son far off and goes running out to him with open arms. He forgives his son immediately because the son has come back. And what a great example of God's love and mercy for us. When we sin and separate ourselves from God and feel sorrow for those sins and then intend not to do it again, and we return back to God asking for his forgiveness, he's going to be there running towards us with open arms. Beautiful, beautiful metaphor of God's compassion and forgiveness. He throws a party for the younger son because of that joy of him being lost but now found, or him being essentially dead and then brought back to life again. He loves his younger son. He also loves the older son, who is in an interesting twist to the end of the story, comes back from the fields and sees that his father has been throwing a party for the younger sinful son. And he's angry about that. He feels jealous that he's been doing everything he's supposed to be doing as the older son, never making mistakes, never sinning, being that perfect person. And why hasn't the father given him any gifts? And because of that pride, he feels like he wants to separate himself from the father, separate himself from the younger son. And so we don't really know what happens after the story, but we suspect maybe that his sin, his desire to separate himself, is because of his lack of the ability to feel compassion. That he sins as well, because he separates himself from the father. He separates himself from the younger son because of that pride and that inability to forgive. You know, when we say in the Lord's Prayer, forgive us our trespasses, forgive us our sins as we forgive those who trespass against us, as we forgive those who sin against us. That the story challenges us not only to, like the younger son, experience that desire for God's mercy, that sorrow and contrition, and then to return back to the Father, but also, if we are one of those, perfect people, to humble ourselves as well, forgive others just like the Father does, to experience that love, that compassion that he also has for others, and to spread that to our brothers and sisters in this world as well. So something to think about is, how have you been like the younger son? How can you be more like the Father? Or when have you been like the older son who wasn't able to forgive? So when have you needed God's forgiveness? When have you been compassionate and forgiven? And when have you had a hard time forgiving someone who has offended you or others? That's the challenge that Jesus poses to us as we hear and read this story today, and the challenge that we need to ponder and meditate on, how we can be more compassionate. How can we seek God's mercy whenever we might need it? So, wonderful, wonderful story in Luke chapter 13. Go read it. Go make disciples. God bless.